you're in the right place. Dr. Chris Wusterhausen has been in your shoes, and he's done the work and can show you how you can turn things around. In this podcast, he'll share his personal stories and advice on how to create the life you want for yourself as a provider and as a business person. You'll learn how to reclaim your life, your time, your energy, and most of all, reclaim the dream you had when you started your journey to become a doctor. Welcome to the Dr. Chris podcast. Okay, welcome to Age Management Conversations with Dr. Chris. Dr. Chris is our favorite physician. He's the one physician that you can talk to and get answers about what's going on and yet not get a canned answer that feels a little bit condescending and why are you wasting my time with these questions? And I'm speaking from experience because I'm the one that always asks weird questions. And it's like, Steve, why don't you just follow along? But I got questions and I imagine most people do too. Dr. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm great, Steve. Good to see you, or good to talk to you and see you. Hope all is well.
So here's the topic that everybody's talking about all around the world. And especially now that the vaccines, the FDA has come out and approved these. There's a lot of questions swirling around this. There's a lot of questions swirling around mandates. And I've just been wanting to kind of sit with a doctor and talk about it without a lot of pressure. And I'm curious about what your takes are. What do you think is going on? And just
okay.
Let's talk about it.
You know, it's big news, obviously, earlier in the week. Was it Monday, Tuesday? I don't remember the exact day, but the Pfizer vaccine got full FDA approval for 16 and up for the their COVID vaccine. And I think that's, a really big deal because I think some people's hesitation has been the fact that it was not FDA approved. It was more in the experimental status. I think there are people out there that feel better with an FDA approval for something that they're not possibly being experimented on with the vaccine. So, I'd like to kind of start it off because, there's some things happening, at least around our country and especially in the medical field with mandates. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are who still haven't been vaccinated, that are very concerned about getting the vaccine. I think there's really three populations in our country right now that when it comes to the vaccine, the people who are all for it, the people that are, they may not even know why, but they are concrete against it. And then there's a percentage in the middle. And probably who I'm talking to today are going to be those people in the middle, because I may not be able to change those people who's for right or wrong reasons are so concrete in their decision making. And I'd like to kind of get into maybe why some people make those kind of decisions a little bit later in the podcast. So maybe you're that person that really has been, because I do hear a lot of my patients and friends saying, I really just want it to be out a little longer. I'd like to see a little more data. I think that's a reasonable, I have told my patients, I understand that thought. I really do. Now, if they're really high risk, like if I truly feel like, my God, if you get COVID, your chance of having significant issues is high, I will spend a lot of time trying to educate them on the vaccine. For full disclosure, my two teenage children, my wife, myself are fully vaccinated. Pfizer vaccine, all four of us. That was all voluntary on all four members of my family's part. So, I just wanted out there that I am pro-vaccine, pro-COVID vaccine. But that was a decision that I made for myself, my wife made for herself, and my kids made for themselves after educating ourselves. So anyway, for that population that they feel better with something being FDA approved, it's now there. And what I really want to talk about to start with is there was actually an article that came out this week because of the FDA approval in the New England Journal of Medicine. So for non-doctors, that's the holy grail of medical journals. Okay. I do believe that there's a subset of our population out there that believes all the medical data that is presented right now is fake. And I was telling my nurse practitioner today, If the New England Journal of Medicine now is falsifying medical data, we're in real trouble. We're screwed. And I don't think anyone believes that. Looking at the data from the Pfizer vaccine in particular. So what they did is they compared the risk ratio for people who have not been vaccinated and have not had COVID versus people who've been vaccinated versus people who've had COVID. So we're looking at how things naturally occur, because obviously clots, arrhythmias, herpes outbreaks, those things occur naturally in our population, whether you've had a vaccine or not had a vaccine. And actually, the only thing that they saw that was elevated above baseline for adverse events in the Pfizer vaccine was lymphadenopathy, quite a bit of it, but that's lymph node swelling. Imagine that. We're giving something that's going to cause your immune system to react. So your lymph nodes could swell up a little bit. They do reverse. They do go back down. A slight increase in appendicitis, a slight increase in myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart, which is probably something that gets the most discussion at the moment. It's usually healthy teenage boys that have the highest rate of myocarditis. And I'd read an article that says that everybody with the myocarditis that is being followed, they do return to normal. It's not that they have long-term after effects of this myocarditis, but actually when you look at the rate of myocarditis versus baseline, yes, it was higher than baseline, but it was significantly less than if you got COVID. So, one of the things I hear about from my patients, well, I have a fear of myocarditis. Well, okay, but if you get COVID, you have a much higher chance of getting myocarditis than you do of getting the vaccine. Although I do understand those thoughts, because I still think there's a lot of people out there that believe that they just won't get COVID. And I'm here to say, in my humble opinion, you're either going to get vaccinated or you're going to get COVID, or you're going to get both before this is all said and done. I think every adult will end up with one of those three scenarios. So you have to prepare for that. When it happens, I think is, like everybody's had the common cold. Everybody's probably had the flu at some point in their life, whether they knew it or not. These are things that we come in contact with. Our bodies know how to react to, and that's just what happens. So going back to that faction that's in the middle, being FDA approved may mean something to them. Now, I always try to tell my patients, I'm not a big pharma guy. You know this. Any of my patients know this, that I'm not a huge believer in big pharma. I do understand patient skepticism of big pharma being your Pfizer, your Mercks, your AstraZenecas of the world. I don't believe always that big pharma has our best interest at heart. I think that many times profit margins are at what is at heart. And I would be completely lying if I said, oh yeah, whatever big pharma says, I go for. The decision that I've come up with is based on science, is based at looking at the data, just like I try to make my decision on everything. And to be real honest with you, I'm okay with patients who truly look at the data, who make educated decisions to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. What gets me is when I try to pin patients down or friends down as to why they're not doing it. And they either can't really give you a reason, or they give you some form of a ridiculous reason, as to, like my favorite, the trackers in the vaccine. I saw a comedian this weekend, and I forget his name, but he said something I thought was really funny, because there's a subset of our population that believes this vaccine is intended to kill us. And he said, if they're trying to take over the world, why do they want to kill the people who comply? You're going to be left with everybody who doesn't do what you want to do. That doesn't make good sense. Just to kind of make a little bit of a joke out of it, I thought that was quite funny. So anyway, Pfizer has compiled this data now. We are seeing, much less rates of vaccinated patients being hospitalized with COVID. Yes, if you're vaccinated, you can still get COVID. Yes, you can still spread COVID. I don't believe the vaccine is the sole answer to this pandemic. I don't believe that at all, but it is a tool in our toolbox. As you and I talk about all the time, proper eating, proper exercise, proper immune support is as important as all of this. It all goes together. It's like a finely tuned orchestra. We need all of these different instruments playing a role to protect ourselves.
So let's talk about and what does FDA approved mean exactly? I have an idea. The drug's gone through some sort of evaluation and they sign off on it. But what does that really mean?
It means that has met all the criteria of the FDA to show that its benefit highly outweighs its risks, and that its safety profile is such that they believe that, again, it's got much more benefit than harm. The FDA approval process, in my opinion, is actually a little too strict. There's many things that are in Europe and other places that are used extensively. We kind of look at drugs differently in the United States. We're always kind of behind the times because Europe is more like, okay, it's met the basic criteria for being safe. Let's go ahead and put it out there and see if we can help people with it. Versus here, we really hold things back for years, to make sure that they're safe. So it just depends how you look at it. As a physician, I want things quickly, so I can help my patients. But the FDA approval just means that the experts have looked at it, that do these things, and that they say that it looks overall to be extremely safe, that its efficacy is there, so that's what FDA approval means, basically.
And there are some drugs that they've approved and later gone back and unapproved, right? Based on,
it does happen. It's not certainly common, but there have been some occasions where that does happen. But most of the time, the opposite happens. It'll be something that we believe is right about to be released, and then boom, they look at the final data and say, no, we're not letting it through. That's even more common. I can't tell how many times that there was this medication's coming in the next quarter, and then you read the article about, no, it got knocked down at the very last second because of some side effect they felt like was just too high to use with the population.
so a lot of folks now are maybe the conversations around the vaccines being mandated by a company or a state or whatever. That feels like, that doesn't feel very American, does it?
No, and I think that's actually what's dividing our country. And I'm glad you brought it up that way, because it's why I think people are becoming so strong in their beliefs with the vaccine. Unfortunately, I think the vaccine has become a political tool. And I don't believe it should be a political tool. I don't believe SARS-CoV-2 is a political issue. It's a people issue. As an American, I always say, I wish as America we could get back to that you can be a Republican and a Democrat and still be friends. And sometimes I wonder if that's the case these days. I've seen friendships, families broken up, people I know literally over politics. And I think that's just ridiculous. We've become, and I think it is what we're doing right now, but we're trying to be the good guys, is social media. It's really dividing our country. It gives us a platform for every person, including kooks and non-kooks, to get out there and say what they feel. And so I feel like that. I was listening to another podcast this week, and he was talking about the psychological aspects behind, if you feel like somehow your civil liberties are being threatened, how you react. And it is natural to basically, and you don't even realize, subconscious, you dig in, you dig into your foxhole, and you're going to fight. It's like they're coming to get my guns. By God, I'm going to load up on guns. And, as I always joke with my brother, he's much bigger gun guy than I am. Not anti-gun, but he's huge into hunting. He's like, over my dead body, and I believe him. I think that's actually what would happen. But then even when you sometimes, so let's say a person's anti-gun control, but even sometimes when there is a gun control law that actually makes really good sense and doesn't affect them, they're still against it because they feel like it's the start of the end. And you start to fight everything. And I think the vaccine has become that way for about a third of our population. I feel like they think, government's out to get us, and they may or may be right, not be right about that. That's not the purpose of our podcast. They think their civil liberties are being infringed upon, and they feel like this vaccine is just another tool of our government to take control of us. And so then they find the data that they want to see to back up their thought about the vaccine. So what I always try to tell patients to do is if you're watching a video, if you're reading an article, who's it from, who's it by, and what is their gain in this? Is this somebody who's trying to get a following of people who think like you, and they're a podcaster or something that's trying to get sponsorships, and they're kind of the Alex Joneses of the world that are really, that's what they're going for. I think you need to take that with a grain of salt. As I told my nurse practitioner, somebody comes out and says the vaccine is perfect for everybody should get it. We probably need to look at that person too, because the vaccine is not for everybody. And so it's sad. It's sad that we've gotten to this point in our country to where we get so dug in. I heard somebody the other day say, and I thought this really hit home, was that if the polio vaccine had come out today during social media, no one would probably have gotten it because of just all the differing views. But, our world was in such disarray whenever the polio vaccine came out. People were just lying, just give it to me. Another thing I'd like to say about that. So one of the things I hear a lot is that the vaccine doesn't work. I will tell you that's what I hear very commonly. The COVID vaccine does not work. What they mean by that is it's not 100% vaccine, and I will agree with them. It's not 100%. You can still get COVID. You can still be hospitalized. You can still die from COVID despite the vaccine. But what we do know, and the facts are clear, that you have a 15 times less chance of dying from COVID if and it's probably even greater than that, but like a minimum of 15 time chance of less of a chance of dying from COVID. Um, you know, um, when the polio vaccine came out, some people had to be vaccinated multiple times, because now we're talking about the boosters. That's going to be the next, you know, people who are for the vaccine are going to be like, yeah, just get your booster. People who are against it are going to be like, see, I told you it doesn't work. You got to go get a booster. Um, you know, when you get the booster, it is limited studies. I will admit that there haven't been a ton of people in these studies. I always try to be honest about what I'm reading. There's a few hundred patients, not thousands or tens of thousands, but you're seeing about a 3-fold increase in antibodies after the third shot versus after the second shot. When you're looking at countries, though, that have very high rates of vaccine rates, like Singapore, Iceland, they're handling the Delta variant very, very well. And the reason that I believe today we're not handling the Delta variant very well is just our high rate of vaccinate, our lack of a high rate of vaccination in our country. We're still hovering around low 50s on our, completed vaccines of our adults in the United States, whereas other countries are 75, 80%. I will tell you, there's countries out there, these third world countries, that would love to line up to get this vaccine. In my opinion, we are lucky to at least have access to it in America like we do. Whether you're for it or against it, at least we have access to it. And I think that's what I want for my patients, is to have access. Now, going back to the mandates, like I was telling you earlier, I do a lot of work with rehab centers, and President Biden has passed a bill that is passed. We don't know when it's going into effect, which is not necessarily mandating that workers who work in nursing home and rehab centers get vaccinated. But what it is saying is that the vaccine rate of those facilities will affect their reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid. So in an indirect way, it's a mandate. So am I for mandates? Absolutely not. I do agree that I understand maybe why they're looking at mandates. I wish there didn't have to be mandates. I don't want mandates. I'm not a government guy. I don't believe more government is ever good. But then in the state of Texas, Governor Abbott has just said that government entities can't have mandates, but like in the rehab centers, that's a federal reimbursement program. So Governor Abbott has no say over that. It's going to get really, nasty before it's all said and done. And unfortunately, in these rehab centers, I think some employees that work there are going to have to make a really tough decision in the next few months. Do they trust the science? Are they okay with it now that it's been out at that time, 7, 8, 9, 10 months? Do they feel comfortable enough getting it? Hopefully they can use just a little bit of this as maybe their decision maker to feel better about it. I can tell you, I've been part of vaccinating hundreds of patients from 13, 14 to 107 years old is my oldest patient that's been vaccinated under my care. And we've had no severe adverse events in that group. And most of that group is very senior patients. I can tell you by my experience that I am seeing COVID again in my facilities in those senior patients, but they're for the most part are vaccinated, and they're for the most part having very mild symptoms compared to what we were seeing pre-vaccine. So my practical brain will tell you I see tremendous success with this vaccine so far. Don't get me wrong, Steve. We all wish there was the perfect vaccine, there was zero side effects. We got one shot. We had lifelong immunity and we never had to think about it again. Maybe we'll come up with that at some point. We don't have that right now. But what I will say is what I said in the beginning. I don't think we're getting out of this until you either get vaccinated, or you get vaccinated and get it, some form of those scenarios. I mean, this is picking up steam. It's not calming down. And for those people out there, because I really do feel like a lot of people think we've gone back to normal. We're just as deep in this as we were this time last year.
What are some of the things, I'd be in congruent with our previous conversations, what are some of the activities, diet, supplements? What are some of the things that we can do to bolster our immunity?
Yeah, and those are things that we can always do all the time. Like I had a
Mhm.
patient today said, okay, when can I stop all of this stuff? And I'm like, no, that's not the purpose. Let's use this as a springboard to keep this going when this is all said and done. As I always tell everybody, proper nutrition is where everything starts. Trying to stay away from a high inflammatory diet, staying away from those fried, fatty, processed foods, high sugary, starchy foods, trying to eat just like clean foods, eat clean, if you can, organic, grass-fed type foods, without all the crap in it, with good, clean vegetables, preferably more green than not. That's always a good way to go. Some sort of a routine exercise program, getting that heart rate up above 120 beats a minute, keeping it there for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, hopefully at least 3 times a week for about 30 minutes is another great way to do it. Looking at your supplement regimen, making sure you're getting that vitamin C, vitamin D. As everybody hears me say, vitamin D is more of a hormone than a vitamin. It's crucial to our health. It's crucial for our bones and joints, but also our immune system and mood. So that vitamin C, that vitamin D, the zinc, the quercetin, those things are just really important to keep going at all times. Like I was really excited, my supplement provider, and this is not a plug for my supplements, but they actually came out with one called Orthoimmune, which actually has everything in one capsule, so that now that person doesn't have they don't have to have the 5 bottles. It's not even that expensive, which is nice, because that's what people really struggle with is, I've got 5 bottles and how do I take all this stuff? And, this one, they can take a couple capsules a day and be good. So the supplement regimen is really, really important. And, I'm always going to say hormonal balance, get your hormones checked. You're always, that's always a great thing to do for your immune system and just your overall health.
When you talk about the diet, for me, the light bulb went off when I want to change or alter my diet to where it's less acidic and more alkaline. And that's because you're helping the cell be more alkaline, which is more of a defensive posture against viruses.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me because I didn't say it. Alka-Seltzer Gold, or AKA baking soda. A couple teaspoons of baking soda, or a couple of dissolving Alka-Seltzer Golds in a glass of water a day to get that alkalinization that you look for intracellularly, so that your body has the best defense system. Because as we know, viruses, bacteria, funguses, fungi, they don't like acidic. I mean, they like acidic environments. They don't like alkalized environment, just like you just said. So that is a really cheap defense mechanism, as we talked about with the pandemic around the early 1900s. And one of the main treatments was baking soda, and believe it or not, it had some real efficacy along with that. So we can take all these little things and plug them together. And I know that there's that subset of population, and I don't always necessarily disagree. I had this discussion with one of my nurse practitioners last week. if I do all these things, I should be okay when I get COVID. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, except for the fact that me personally, I don't like to risk things if I don't have to. I guess maybe I'm a gambler at heart. I like to put all the odds in my favor. So if I can take this vaccine, and by the way, one thing I'd like to say, how to minimize the side effects of the vaccine. I think these are things that if you do prior to the vaccine, you have a chance of having less side effects from the vaccine, like taking your AC, your vitamin C, your vitamin D, taking your, baking soda for a few days prior to that. I think you have a better chance of not having an extreme immune reaction to the vaccine. But again, even in my patients that are extremely healthy, I still say, of course, it's your choice. I still recommend them getting the vaccine.
And one more last thing I've been seeing in the news, if you kind of speak about ivermectin, there are certain drugs that people are talking about that could be a prophylactic in nature.
Yeah, so that is the burr under my blanket, because this weekend in particular, I saw a lot of stuff going around on the internet about ivermectin. And I do use ivermectin. And then we look at the IMAS protocol, which is one of the critical care societies. They actually have ivermectin as part of their protocol. And I have seen really good success with ivermectin. What is ivermectin? It's an antiparasitic. The negative ivermectin, in my opinion, is that people have access to it through their feed store. And people are picking up ivermectin from their tractor supply or their feed store locally, and they have no clue how to dose this stuff. And they're using, first of all, they're using agricultural grade ivermectin, which is a bad idea. Two, they don't know how to dose it. It's a paste usually, and they're just, oh, that sounds good, and they're using it, or they're trying to dose it based off of what the package says for a cow. And people are having a lot of toxicity problems because of that. Now, there is a group of people, because I saw someone, a famous person, tweet this weekend, and it just really shot my blood pressure up. It said, if your doctor prescribes ivermectin, your doctor is a quack. And, there are multiple good studies out there right now showing how ivermectin, because of its anti-inflammatory aspect, can decrease the severity and the duration of COVID. And it is a remarkably safe medication when used properly. In other words, the right route, the right quality, and the right dose. And it is freaking ridiculously cheap. I can treat my patients for about $5 with ivermectin, and it's very inexpensive. And, if you separate my two practices from rehab center nursing homes, those are elderly sick patients. But if you take my wellness center, I am to date still 0 hospitalizations with how we treat our patients here. And I think that's impressive because we've treated a lot of patients. Now, knock on wood, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. I'm not cocky enough to believe that, you do what I say and you have no chance of being hospitalized, but we've been able to get people through this. But one last thing I'd like to say is I have a lot of my patients who were anti-vaccine until they got COVID. And then they get COVID. They're not ill enough to be in the hospital, but they feel like a freaking Mack truck ran over them. And the one thing that you hear me talking about a lot that people do not discuss enough is post-COVID syndrome. Post-COVID syndrome is real. Post-COVID syndrome happens, and about a third of symptomatic patients will have some form of post-COVID syndrome. What does that mean? It means chronic headaches, depression, muscle weakness, fatigue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that can last days to weeks to months to maybe the rest of your life. And so for me, that's my biggest fear with COVID, is not me getting COVID and dying. It's me getting COVID, getting well, I think, and getting post-COVID syndrome of something that'll affect me for weeks and months. I went and saw one of my doctors last week, 2 weeks ago. He'll remain nameless. He had been out for a month. I said, hey, what's going on? You rescheduled me 3 times. He's like, I was out for a month with COVID. I was training for an Ironman. I can't even step foot in the gym a month later because I'm so winded and he's my age, great shape. So you take a guy who's in great shape and he's still having this many problems. So, I mean, just to flippantly say, I'll be fine. I think that's maybe a kind of like the Russian roulette. Yeah, you might work out for you. Okay. But every now and then some people can get shot in the temple with a bullet. So, and the other thing I say is just the flu. And then I promise I will shut up. The difference between the flu and COVID is that the flu is something you get and you're very ill and you feel like crap. I've never had COVID, so I don't know what it feels like. I have had the flu multiple times. But when the flu is over, the fever goes away, usually within 24 hours, eat a couple of good meals, get a good night's sleep, you're back to normal. You can go back to the gym, you feel normal. That is not the way it goes with COVID. I don't think I ever talked to anybody who has symptomatic COVID that tells me, yeah, it lasted 5 days and it was over and I was perfectly 100%. They usually will say at minimum, for a couple of weeks after that, I didn't feel right. And then I slowly got a little bit better. So that's another big difference though, between those two illnesses.
I felt that way after one of my divorces.
I feel you there.
So this is a great conversation. We've been talking with Dr. Kris Wusterhausen at the Research Clinic. He also has rehab facilities as well. And so he's treated a lot of folks with these conditions. And I want to remind everybody that's listening, this conversation was in the spirit of education. If you should be approaching your physician before you change anything or ask questions, this conversation's exactly that: how to go to your doctor and have a better conversation because you got to sit with another doctor and listen and learn some good things. Dr. Kris, anything else you want to share?
No, I think we covered plenty. So I think we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, people need to talk about it. It's so political in nature. It's really uncomfortable, but I think if folks can just kind of calm down and step back and see what the intent that your message is coming from, there might have been something here that could be really beneficial for them. So I appreciate your time, Dr. Kris.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate your time.
All right. And that's another episode of Age Management Conversations with Dr. Kris. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining the Dr. Kris podcast. If you learned something today and you want to connect and get more information, visit our website, www.drkris.life, where you can find more great information or even schedule a time to learn how you can engage with Dr. Kris. Be sure to follow, like, share, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Dr. Kris podcast.